fact that in 2016, Janet Yellen said that we'll never really have a recession in our lives again, or I'm paraphrasing, if you will. I believe that ship has sailed. Last summer, we hit the recession definition, and everybody just decided to change the definition of recession. So what has astounded me as I've done the deep dive on all this stuff is I get amazed every single day how these people are so skilled at kicking the can down the road. They change the rules as they go. If anybody thinks there's some sort of grandmaster chess getting played here, it's not. What was it, the last couple of weekends or so, they were kind of making things up as they went on Sundays. If you think about the US dollar, if you will, in a grander sense of things, it has to do with full faith and credit. And I believe what you're seeing now is a lot of people losing a lot of full faith and credit when they're making stuff up as they go. So, right. I mean, I think they're doing themselves a discredit a lot, but what else can they do? When you're 32 trillion in debt and no one is stopping the spending, what else can you do here?
Welcome to another RTD interview. Today, I'm excited to have returning guest, Mr. Nate Fisher. Nate is an IT manager for large Department of Defense contractors with a degree in cybersecurity and business administration. And today he's joined us to share his thoughts on the economy, precious metals, as well as the tokenization of metals using the blockchain. And he's also a blogger who does a great job over at renaissancemen.org. So definitely check him out. But Nate, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing excellent, man. Excited to connect up with you and to get your thoughts on where we're at, where we're going, and as well as opportunities out here, especially with your background in the technology realm. I know it brings a unique perspective that I'm definitely looking forward to diving into. And before we dive into more of that, for those who may not be familiar with you or didn't have a chance to watch our previous interview that did very well amongst the community members, give us a little bit of your background beyond what I just mentioned when I briefed little bio there.
So by trade, I am an IT manager for a large contract, been doing that for a better part of 27 years. But relevant to the discussion we're going to have today, I have a background within cybersecurity and an MBA, but more than anything, I'm very obsessed with a lot of different academic, a lot of different kind of academic backgrounds, if you will. So around 2019 or so, I took a real huge dive into gold and silver. Problems with the repo market and the like. And I just went headfirst in, studying 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And anyway, I kind of talk about this as like my 4th or 5th graduate degree as far as how I've studied it over the last few years. So I'm not going to pretend I'm an industry insider for anyone listening to this here. So my background also, as well as I do a ton of writing. So you're going to see a lot of my academic background coming into my writing here. So I have ridiculous amounts of theories I write about, and some of them we're going to try and cover today.
Sounds good. Well, appreciate you for sharing that. And so definitely, yeah. So just from your recent writings on your blog there, you did a great job touching on some very hot topics that we're going to touch on here, as well as you're going to take us down a little bit of a deep dive with some presentation visual aids. So I'm definitely a big fan of that. And so before we move forward, I guess, what are some things that you're keeping an eye on in the global economy, financial markets that, excite you, concern you, or things you're really dialed in on right now?
Well, unfortunately, some of the things that concern me are also the same things that kind of excite me a little bit. And I say that because I just mentioned the repo market issue, but what that kind of did was kind of get me thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen to the real estate I have? So I am a small business owner in a sense where I have some rental units that I rent out. And my concern was, well, what's going to happen if the housing market goes down again? Am I going to lose everything? So popped in The Big Short, started watching Michael Burry and all this other fun stuff. And you start going down this rabbit hole of how can I protect what I have? What kind of hedge, what kind of danger do we have right now? So I felt like the increasing debt, no one can get elected ever again in this country by trying to promise to reduce the debt. Everyone has to pander to someone. And with that, you have debt that's going to spiral out of control. So what that promises you is almost a certainty that the currency is going to be debauched beyond all comprehension. So what I did was I set up a massive play more or less to play that short on the value of the US dollar. So as much as it concerns me, I also kind of sleep well at night right now, because if I wake up to any kind of danger, my portfolio kind of goes through the roof. So yeah, I've been doing a lot of conversations like this, a lot of writings like this, to try and get the word out on precious metals and means of investing in them. So that's kind of where I've been coming from these days.
Right now, the short you're referring to, you having set up to, I guess, better diversify and protect yourself, assuming that's leading into the precious metal space as well as what opportunities there, or what exactly, if you don't mind sharing with us.
Well, it mostly, so I did video on another channel a couple weeks ago about how to layer your precious metals portfolio, if you will. So a lot of people think about, if you don't own it, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. Well, that starts to become a little bit of a problem when you start getting some in size, if you will. And then you start realizing the security issues. And then you start looking at, well, what about the precious metals miners? What about vaulting? What about digital currencies backed by gold? What about those types of things? So I laid out something where it talked about different ways that you could invest in a lot of different areas. And if you think about a certainty, I have something with the slide coming up down the road, but I'll preview it. Is if you think about 100 years ago, you put a $20 bill with that orange seal, you put that in a vault with a 1 ounce piece of gold. 100 years ago, they were equal value. And you open up that vault today, and that piece of gold is now worth $2,000. Well, most people are thinking, oh my God, the gold went up in value, but no one's really ever thinking about the inverse, about how the currency has been debased by 98% or the like. So, I mean, the same can be said with the real estate, with stocks and all that stuff. Over a period of time, the currency gets debauched and debased even more and more and more. And now you see the debt that is just piling up. And, we were talking beforehand about some of the ceilings and the like that may be coming, but there's no stopping of spending right now. So from where I'm coming from, and I'll get into inflation and all that later, but I see precious metals as kind of an inevitable play, not necessarily imminent.
Interesting point there. Now, of course, the debt ceiling. So this upcoming summer is going to be a very interesting time frame, because there's more talk about the U.S. default. And so I've been covering this subject matter for quite some time now, going through, several different defaults, or debt ceiling where they ultimately hike. And you mentioned they can't stop basically what they're doing. So what, in your opinion, is anything different now about this current environment, given the debt load, the global events happening without what's happening out east, and all the narratives of BRICS and stuff like that? Is anything different this current moment from what you're feeling or thinking?
I don't see it. I don't. I think it's all political theater at this point. I think there's a reason for the debt limit. And I think no matter who is in power, you don't want that party dominating the other party and spending them into oblivion. So I think it does provide a good check and balance for the other party, whoever it is, to try and control the spending and keep it from going out of control. Because if you had the party in power all the time that could just write blank checks to their constituents, they will always stay in power. So the other party has to be able to limit the spending, if you will, so they can all agree upon it. But that ship has sailed a decade ago, if you will. Now it's political grandstanding for what they can get for their constituents if they raise the debt limit. So I don't see a default as far as them not paying their bills, but the default is how everyone else is saying, is that they will just continue to debase the currency, and that's the other way of you're defaulting. So again, even if they don't pay their bills, in either way, you're looking at precious metals going up. So again, all of these roads end up, pointing to gold in some way, shape, or form.
All right. Now, I'm curious to get your thoughts about how we apparently, the narrative coming out of the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell and the committee of people who have been chosen to handle monetary policy on behalf of you and I. Before, there was no signs of recession. Now, after this Fed meeting just came out this past week, or was released, they talked about a mild recession sometime at the end of this year. So what, in your opinion, what has changed in their perspective, and how much of this banking situation that is still brewing, as well as the threat of commercial real estate also coming to a halt at some point, is those are some of the things they might see as their version of a mild recession? And will it be mild, or what can we expect beyond, mild?
Well, the fact that, I mean, was it 2016? Janet Yellen said that we'll never really have a recession in our lives again, or I'm paraphrasing, if you will. So I believe that ship has sailed. I think, last summer we hit the recession definition and everybody just decided to change the definition of recession. So what has astounded me as I've done the deep dive on all this stuff is I get amazed every single day how these people are much they're so skilled at kicking the can down the road. They change the rules as they go. If anybody thinks there's some sort of grandmaster chess getting played here, it's not. What was it, the last couple weekends or so, they were kind of making things up as they went on Sundays, changing
Right.
rules, inventing this, and each iteration of this, it seems like they're just kind of making it up as they go. And I think if you think about the US dollar, if you will, in a grander sense of things, it has to do with full faith and credit. And I believe what you're seeing now is a lot of people losing a lot of full faith and credit when they're making stuff up as they go.
Right.
So, I mean, I think they're doing themselves a discredit a lot, but what else can they do? When you're 32 trillion in debt and no one is stopping the spending, what else can you do here? I mean, you've interviewed a ton of people here. What do you think about where this is going?
I think they've been stalling for quite some time now. The inevitable is in front of us, and it happens to be around the monetary shift away from Federal Reserve liabilities, ultimately speaking, because of the weaponization of the dollar. And so I've been kind of paying a lot of attention to the movements out east with just the surface information we're getting on the BRICS development, and the noise is getting louder in reference to other countries being very vocal in their, I guess, displeasure with the U.S. and their role in, local affairs outside of the U.S., as well as just the debt loads that they've been forced to take on through IMF and BIS and all those institutions from the West. And, the fact when you have all these currency swaps and bilateral deals and all these memorandums of agreements being done away from USD terms, is like, okay, well, they're not afraid no more to be vocal and say, hey, the dollar's done. And then just recently with the Brazilian president and Xi meeting, and him basically saying that why are we still using the dollar amongst ourselves type of narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would have never happened 10 years ago. When it's happened 20 years ago with Gaddafi and Saddam, we know what happened as a result of that. So now the world's not afraid. And so now it's a matter of, are they trying to prepare us for that next level of a distraction? And so we had a previous distraction, which happens to be a health situation, because that came about right after the repo market. So September 2019, then
Yeah.
we had a health scare, rallied the troops, banks, profits went through the roof, all this extra currency came into existence. Here we are now. Things are fizzling out. There's not as much discretionary spending amongst the consumers. Credit cards, all these problems are here. So I'm under impression that I wouldn't be surprised if there's another event
So
sometime soon.
yeah, something else to add to that. You also touched on the commercial real estate. Now, that was something I've been writing about for quite some time. I actually wrote about this summer of 2020. Remember I said about kicking the can down the road? I figured with COVID and all these buildings shutting down and all these people going home that all this commercial real estate would just blow up, right? Well, a funny thing happened. All these big companies figured out how to do telework. Now, obviously, if you're serving food in a bar, that doesn't work. But in my type of field, in working in IT, in a lot of different fields, I mean, you would have like Merrill Lynch had something like 97% of their employees working from home during COVID. And you got to start to think of yourself here. Hey, I'm in Manhattan. I'm paying ridiculous amounts per square foot. I don't know what it is, but it's probably ridiculous. And most of my workforce can work from home. So why do I need this expensive office building downtown? Now, I believe you also talked about the recessions here. Now, I went through the recession in 2001 and 2008, where I lost my job both times, essentially in IT. So for people today that are, the millennial generation, if you will, none of them have actually seen recession. I mean, they've had it tough at times, but they've never seen what it's like, 8% unemployment, if you will. I know COVID was a struggle for a lot, but I don't think they've ever even gone through a recession. And with that, I think that perspective here, you run into a situation where it's like, what else can go wrong now? With the potential recession right now, you're looking at all this office building. they're gonna be vacant. I don't think that unemployment is going to go up right away. I think the issue is that a lot of these companies are cashed up and they want to hold on to their employees as long as they can. And I think first they're going to get rid of a lot of the commercial real estate, because if you're going to lay off a whole bunch of your workforce, you're going to have a bunch of empty real estate anyway.
Mhm.
So why not get rid of the real estate first? Go to a lot more teleworking, and then so that I think is also going to mask the damage to the economy for quite some time yet. You're going to see this 4% unemployment, but all this commercial real estate is going to go, it's going to go belly up. And I believe at some point down the road, you're going to start to see 5, 6, 7% unemployment, but not right away. And I think that's going to mask the problem. They're going to be like, oh my God, it's only 3.7% unemployment.
Yeah.
There's not a problem there. Meanwhile, all this commercial real estate is going belly up.
That's even if you still give some credibility towards those figures we've been given. Like I've stopped believing
Yeah.
in the figures coming out of the BIL
Yeah.
or all those agencies, because they are slanted to favor the current kicking of the can down the road, as you mentioned earlier. But to the commercial real estate, with all the major metropolitan areas right now, I think I saw some article recently that said 20 to 30% of the majority of the commercial real estate is vacant. And I'm assuming at some point they're already not performing as far as them debts being met or obligations being met. So there's cascading events that will come about from that, because a lot of stuff is packaged up as somebody's asset in a portfolio somewhere.
Yeah.
Their pension fund is holding on to, and even we have European and foreign investors and also investing in this. So the dominoes will probably fall so fast unless the Federal Reserve comes in and backstops and create another special vehicle to house all that mortgage in the commercial mortgage-backed security relief fund. And
You know,
so they can try to paper over, but
I
the
just
damage is going to be massive.
I saw something funny the other day. Somebody made a comment on this, so I'm going to keep this very high level, but I saw something that a particularly large hedge fund that owns a lot of this commercial real estate has packaged it up and essentially sold it to pension funds, teachers' pension funds. So think about this for a second. If you're this hedge fund and all this commercial real estate blows up, no one's bailing you out. But if you then send this over to the pension funds, you get out. No one's going to let a teacher pension fund go down. So right now, I believe there's a lot of scurrying of the cockroaches and the rats. And I think there's a lot of things getting untangled behind the scenes right now, because that will get bailed out. The teacher's pension fund will get bailed out. But, that large hedge fund, which I will not name, will
Right.
not get bailed out. So those types of things, take a look at that in the background.
Right. So basically shifting a lot of those bad loans and all those gambling mechanisms they've created over the last umpteen years as investment vehicles, you shuffle
Yep.
them onto the books of these systemically important institutions, i.e. government-based programs, and then the government can step in and save the day because it's mandatory. It's national security type of issue where we got to protect our own. Okay,
Well,
that makes sense.
remember, a lot of these pension funds, they legally cannot default on them. So the question then is, okay, well, if you bail them out for billions upon billions of dollars, again, you're more debasing the currency. So if you have this pension, it's supposed to pay you $3,000 a month. That might be a good living wage if you're retired and 70 or whatever. But think about 5, 10 years down the road, if that $3,000 is debased into nothing, that $3,000 might get you groceries for the month. So
Right.
you may, again, that's a default by not paying, but it's a default with inflation. And they'll make the payments. It just the currency won't be worth anything.
All right, good point. Now, moving forward into this latter part of the year where economic times are supposed to be tough, given the fact the Fed admitted that there would be a mild recession. Okay, I'm anticipating something a lot worse than mild. I think we've been in a recessionary environment this entire decade since the great financial crisis with the papering over of the system. And so now, here we are to reap the consequences from their actions at this current moment. But as a result of that, the narrative of a central bank digital currency has become widespread. Everybody and their mother's talking about it. Even more people that's not included or not even attentive to monetary and financial policies are starting to pick up this narrative. And so is there any way of preventing or stopping the central bank digital currency? And is it necessarily all going to be all bad, or is there any goods, or because I'm not a fan for it. I think it's just a rebranding of the currency to cover up what they wouldn't want to put out there in paper form during a hyperinflationary type of environment. So it's a cover up, and it's also something they can control. and they can limit the elasticity of how much is out there when they need to bring it back. So that's just my little small little beat. What are you thinking?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but I'll tell you that the CBDC, I've written about that a lot. I've written about the good and the bad of it. Now, a lot of people have not seen what I've written about the good side of it. Obviously, it's a really good tax revenue situation because any exchange ever, you can get your beak wet off of it. And I felt that if it was done in some sort of federated manner where privacy is protected, if the big banks, if you will, were running this with a federated system, if you will, again, I'm using some IT speak here. And if this was protected from the government side of things, then I think that could work. It's not going to happen like that, though. And that's where the scariness comes because let's just say, for argument's sake, whoever is running the country at the time is based on different political views than yourself. Okay. I'll be agnostic to that here. Whoever's running the country says you have to do A, B, and C. And if you don't do A, B, and C, we're going to turn off your digital wallet. Done. And we saw kind of that a little bit with the truckers up in Canada, where if people were going against a certain type of policy, they financially went to war with them. And a CBDC would just pretty much be instant to turn off someone with no recourse. So there are some scary sides to that. And I think you're touching on one of the theories I wrote about where I think that it's very possible. No one's voted for a CBDC at all. So I believe you have, certain political candidates that are campaigning for, hey, let's make sure that this doesn't happen. And whether or not they win or not is to be seen. But the truth be told, a lot of people don't even know what in God's earth it is. So they're like, oh, whatever. But we have this fun thing called the Constitution that basically says nothing but gold or silver should be money. And I'm paraphrasing because of the way they wrote back then. But the point is that they slowly stepped away from that over 200 some years. And there was this transition. I mean, you had the $20 bill for an ounce of gold. And then, let's do the Federal Reserve. Let's depeg the dollar. It was this slow thing. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. And now they're at this place where they're like, hey, we can do whatever we want. I can guarantee you in the next 5 to 10 years, if this CBDC comes to play, I think that the Constitution is going to come back into play here. I believe that you're going to start to see, at the very least, this is going to be potentially unconstitutional to do. But that being said, they're hiring 80,000 more IRS agents, and they're not doing that to, they're not doing that to shuffle papers around. They're doing that to collect more revenue. All of us potentially can see, hey, maybe we should slow down in spending, but their solution here is to let's increase our revenues. So what do you think? I think the CBDCs I believe it's a revenue grabbing mechanism. And it also can be a compliance mechanism. Say what you will about the vax, if you will, but had you not complied to it and the CBDC was there, they could turn off your wallet if you didn't comply. No recourse. So what do you think about it? Isn't it kind of like a tax grabbing mechanism here?
Yes. And I think it's a lot bigger than that. And so the currency side of things is just one play of day-to-day interaction as well as involvement in our lives, because they can see eventually down the line, they'll be able to see what and how, where, and when, and with who you spent. But then you factor in just the old digital identification as well as the health passport situation that was also trying to be pushed. So there's 3 or 4 or 5 different factors that I think is all included in the Agenda 2030, which happens to be formulated or coming from the World Economic Forum and all that other stuff there, which a lot of people would have said was a complete conspiracy, 3 years ago. But after all this information has come out and you actually get quotes from Charles Schwab and all of his, constituents or whatever you want to call them, saying what they would like to see for this future that they envision for humanity. And it has nothing to do with freedom. And it's all, in some form or fashion, it all boils back down to utilizing software in some capacity to track, and trace mankind in real time. And it is the ultimate form of a digital enslavement system that we could have never imagined. But going back into history, we've been seeing signs of this type of stuff throughout history with just controlling humanity to the point where they put us in small little units and subdivisions and cities and all the things that we've been conditioned and groomed to participate in now. this is the digital takeover of that, I think. So it goes a lot darker and deeper than I tend to try to talk about, just because I hope it fails. But then again, it doesn't surprise me at all as this stuff comes out. So it's just more so, what can we do with it? Because the technology is great if used to provide freedom and opportunities. But unfortunately, it's being put in the hands of people who I think mean us harm overall in the long run. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
And the thing is, they may not even see it in the form of harm. And that's where you get a little bit on the outskirts of this, because the people that are doing it might actually just be diehard believers in something. And this is just a form of compliance to that diehard believing, whatever your philosophy is, far left, far right, center, whatever it is. And whoever gets this power can then have this form of compliance. And I think you're right. I mean, that is just a very scary way to go about it. And like I said, I mean, there is a technical way of getting it to work where you have a federated system, where you have like a banking system that has your identities that are tied to the transactions. And then the government, with perhaps a court warrant, can then inspect data, but the government would not be able to look at this data real time. They would need to have some sort of probable cause.
Right.
But as we saw with the Patriot Act, a lot of these things can just get abused, and people can just kind of get a judge that are friendly to things and trample our privacy. And that's another thing in cybersecurity a lot of people don't realize, because there's a huge aspect of privacy that a lot of people don't account in with cybersecurity. Everybody thinks of like viruses and the like, but thinking you were just talking about, like, if you maybe you donate to a certain political campaign, that's private. That's between you and your campaign you're donating for, and you don't want opposition identifying who in what neighborhood is voting for who based off of their political donation. So it's a rabbit hole that's pretty scary to go down.
Right. But it's interesting, you mentioned Patriot Act. That was 20 plus years ago. And the same rules and regulations and restrictions apply today. TSA, body checks, body scans, all that surveillance stuff was set up then. And then now we got the Restrict Act, which is on the books and might be pushed forward. And that deals directly, I think, I haven't dived into it too deep, but it deals directly with and into the social media sphere with software and computer codes and all types of things, where I thought some computer codes was a self-expression of speech ultimately, but it looks like that might be on the books to be something they want to also maneuver around as well. So if it passes, it's just more of them clamping down on humanity and them being able to say what we can and can do, even to the point where they're trying to say what type of code you can use or what kind of software platforms you can use to say what you want to say. So that's very concerning to me as well.
Well, I think with that, I don't know a lot about what you're talking about there. I do know that TikTok was part of that. And the big part of that is there's a lot underneath that that people aren't aware of. There's a huge element of spying there that people on the back end of that have even admitted to. Right. So with that, there were stories when I was going through my grad school stuff. There were stories of like you would have a certain country being able to turn on a camera in a classified area or something, or in a restricted area, and they could listen in real time to what's going on because they controlled the hardware that was on the system, shipped out of their country, and they could backdoor everything. So privacy is a big thing, and like with TikTok there, that is one in particular I know about, and I understand why they would want to kind of control that, because everyone puts this on their phone as very benign, but on the back end, it's big time data mining that they can get. So think about this: if you do work, in a government area, for argument's sake, and your kid has TikTok, and TikTok allows to listen in on things and know your locations and everything. I mean, there's a lot of implications there that if a national entity is monitoring all of this information, so I can see why that particular piece of software would be a problem.
Yeah, I just think that TikTok is being used as the entry point to a much broader topic of software in general, apps in general. If it's not government censored, government controlled, if we don't have a special branch of the government that deals with communication through these gateways, we can't see, track, and trace for our own national security's sake. So we need to open things up. And of course, I believe there's backdoors and pretty much everything that's been put out there. That's why part of it is free, because they use it for data mining and things like that. So it's not free for just because they want to just give us something to use for our own benefit. But I was very skeptical of TikTok when I attempted to download it, and the permissions was like 3 pages long, and I'm like, no, thank you, because it was obvious at that point for me. But most people, they don't really care about that stuff. But so speaking of which, precious metals, let's just up on that. And so from a technical standpoint, there is ways of utilizing that asset class and modernizing it to a standpoint where here we are today. Computer software, blockchain network is really big. And so there's a lot of opportunity in that as well for people to have actual physical and more so the layers you were just mentioning earlier. And so share with us your thoughts on precious metals and utilizing some of this technology for good, rather.
Well, I'm going to save more of my talk for that, for what we're going to get to later, just because there's a build up to get there.
Okay.
A lot of people right now thinking precious metals, blockchain, and all of a sudden they're thinking, some sort of exchange that's a crypto exchange, and they're going to take all my billions and blah, blah, blah. So there's not a lot of trust right now when you're talking about it at that level. So if you don't mind, it is now a good time to kind of go into
Yes, feel free.
that.
Yes,
Yeah,
I'm here
so I'm
to.
gonna segue into that in a little bit, but for now, let's go into. Okay, I think you have it now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna go in a couple things here. Like I said, monetary inflation was something I wanted to kind of go over, which flows into where we're getting to. There's 3 asset classes. Gold is the center of the financial universe. There's a big impact with that. I believe there's a way that gold is going to be backing the future BRICS exchanges, which then leads to the gold-backed digital currency. So if you have any questions here, feel free to stop me along the way. But the big picture with monetary inflation here, as I talked earlier about the gold in the vault about 100 years ago. The big picture here is that this money, it keeps coming into the system and it sloshes around, and it sloshes everywhere, and it goes to stocks at one point, and then it goes to housing at another point, it goes all over the place. But we see this as inflation. Now, I put this together. Can you see? Yeah, you can see this. The chart I did here, where this monetary inflation, this is kind of how it comes into the system, where it's borrowed into existence. So that I kind of put this here at the start of it, because when money is easy to borrow, let's just say you have 2% mortgages, people are going to run out and buy houses at 2%. Well, what happens then is that money becomes relatively cheap, and you start to bid up the houses. You start getting asset inflation. All of the people that are needed to build the houses, you're going to start to have wage inflation. They're going to be competing for workers. And likewise, you're going to be assembling all of this stuff and building all this stuff out. You're going to need energy for the factory. So a lot of this stuff, though, happens to be controlled, where a country might have your energy policies or resource extraction policies. And those are your dials and the bells and whistles, if you will. And then the consumer sees this as price inflation. So if there's certain policies that happened in 2010, 2011 that kept a lot of that monetary inflation from coming into the system, so be it. But they didn't do that with COVID. They just blasted this out to Joe Sixpack. And this is kind of what a lot of people aren't seeing. Because of 2011, 2010, we didn't see that inflation that was anticipated. So they said, okay, well, we can now do this forever and we're not going to get inflation. Well, they didn't keep it to the banking system this time. So that was kind of the big thing that's happening right now, is to keep all of all of the money that's being borrowed into the system, all the debt that's happening is going to now be inflating things faster and faster. And where that gold and the $20 bill I was talking about above that took 100 years, those types of moves might now happen in 5 or 10 years, just because of the amount of debt and monetary creation that is happening to debase and debauch the currency.
Yeah.
So with that, I mentioned they slosh around into different areas. And this is important because this is going to be telling you why it's going to be going to precious metals. But so I think that there's 3 big asset classes. Now, this is kind of based a little bit off of what Mike Maloney had talked about with his wealth cycles. But Mike talks about money as gold, and I talk about it in the form of commodities, where that Zoltan Pozar had said commodities are collateral and collateral is money. And
Mhm.
I've been writing about this for years, but in reality here, money is an asset class here with commodities. So you also have business, and this is anything that is kind of yield bearing. So you can take money from a commodity and put it into perhaps bonds or stocks. And
Mhm.
then likewise, you have the third asset class, which Mike was talking about homes, but I call it all of property because when times are good, you tend to be buying more things.
Right.
And then when times are tough, you're not buying, maybe you're even selling these things and liquidating them for other stuff. So money will flow around these three asset classes. And then what happens is this currency is when you sell things, is
Mhm.
this currency is what you saw in the safe. That's what was debasing over the course of that 100 years. So the
Right.
longer you hold current financial energy in this state, the more it turns to nothing. So you have to put this currency into one of these three asset classes. So what we've seen was it NASDAQ went up 16 times between 2009 and 2022. 16x. You've also seen houses come up significantly from 2013. And what my bet here was is that a lot of money is going to roll from the stock market into precious metals here.
Mhm.
So I have a lot more built out in that theory as well, but that leads into gold is the center of the universe, the financial universe. And, only in the last, 50 years or so since we went off of the gold standard in 1971, only since then have things really taken a turn for its worse, taken a turn for the worse here. Now, I had a graphic here that before we hit record that it worked very well, and it's not right now.
Mhm.
But the heliocentric is the concept of the planets going around the sun. Okay.
Mhm.
And so that is a very uniform circular motion. Okay. That is a natural state of order. And the geocentric way of thinking of things is when you're back, 5,000 years ago, the sun and everything went around you.
Mhm.
And the concept here was that heliocentric is gold and everything is related to gold over the last 5,000 years. Whereas the geocentric is when we say, hey, we're gonna value things in US dollars. Well, if you value things in US dollars, think about what the value of US dollars was 20, 30 years ago. It's different than what it is today.
Right.
But if you think about what gold was over the last so many hundreds of years, you could have, one ounce of gold is a man's fine suit.
Mhm.
And that's the relative value of that doesn't change. Now, there are ways that this goes and oscillates. And one of the examples here was I looked at back oil. It's approximately 1.2 grams of gold per barrel over the last 90 years or so. And again, that varied. I'm not talking about in the day to day. I'm talking like a
Right.
monthly close because there's
Right.
variations that happen. So it's talking about a relative value. And when you look at this, you see how it translates into market cycles, the oil to gold relationship. Now, if things start, and this can be gold to copper, could be gold to silver, can be whatever relationships you want with these commodities. They
Mhm.
all have relative relationships, and the U.S. dollar kind of just puts noise in there. It's not gold is what all of these things should be based off of, and I believe that's where we're going to be going to with the gold to the BRICS exchanges. And I think that is where this all comes to be, because when I started this, I'm thinking, hey, we should have a gold standard again. No, no, I really I'm convinced that's done with. However,
Right.
gold is the money of kings, as they say, right? And I believe how this is going to come to be again is that at the I believe that right now the U.S. dollar has been used to kind of weaponize our policy to the world.
Right.
Whether you agree with it or not, we have been the first society that has so-called weaponized a reserve currency. And with that, I believe the rest of the world in the last couple of years is kind of like, yeah, we're done with this. So they can't just go out and get rid of all their treasuries tomorrow. But you can start to see China's been bringing them down. Saudi Arabians has been bringing them down. Even Japan's been, selling off a bunch of them to defend the yen recently. So
Right.
I believe that gold is going to come back into play here because it's going to prevent any one fiat currency from ever dominating again. And it's not that it's going to be, you're going to be taking an ounce of gold to go buy a loaf of bread. I'll get to how we can spend it later. But where I can see this going is that, let's say these BRICS exchanges get stood up, whether it's Shanghai, whether it's India, one of these exchanges could be stood up where they have gold pricing for all these commodities. And I believe this is the universal translator. So we have stuff on the exchange. You bring your gold. So the thinking is it's our stuff, your gold problem. I don't want your fiat. I don't care about your yuan. I don't care about your SETI. I don't care about your US dollars. You bring me gold. How you get that gold is your problem. So I believe that's where it's going. And there was this wonderful, amazing thing I thought that Ghana did a couple months ago, where they forced their gold miners to sell them 20% of their gold in SETI. Okay. Now I heard the gold bugs out there, whatever. This is nationalization. No. Ghana basically said, I don't want to get US dollars anymore. You're going to take my currency. You can pay your workers that are here in Ghana in this currency, take it or leave it. And they're taking it, and they take the other 80%, they sell it wherever they want. But this then allows all these nations to then have access to, these commodities. And then they can take gold or whatever and exchange it for oil, and they don't need US dollars to do it. And I believe that is going to be the model a lot of countries are going to do, because you don't need to nationalize a mine. Think about this. If you're Venezuela, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and you go and nationalize things, all these people that had all these experts that knew how to do this all left. And then the country is left with a bunch of government bureaucrats that don't know how to drill oil. So there are models in history that show you, hey, this is not good to do, because then no one's ever going to invest in your country again. And all the experts that were there are going to leave. So I believe that you're going to have a lot of these situations where people that have gold and silver all over the world, these governments are going to probably have local tastes to it, because they're going to be able to use this stuff then on exchanges. So it's a way for like Ghana as well to stabilize their currency. They had a lot of high inflation because they're selling their SETI in order to get dollars. They don't need to do that anymore. So I believe that will stabilize a lot of countries' inflation. So that's kind of where I think that's going. It can also, like I said, you would have a lot of history here where you could see like gold to oil, right? So you could see oil, for argument's sake, priced at 1.2 grams per gold on that exchange. So countries will want to get oil, they bring in their gold, but how do they do it? Okay, and that's kind of where we're going to the next thing here. So I had called this asset-backed digital currencies, I don't know, a couple years ago, but I'm going to mostly focus on gold here. Right now, you'll have certain companies that have this privately in vaults or whatever, but I believe countries are going to be able to start doing this to buy these commodities. So for argument's sake, you buy into an exchange with gold, you deposit it in your local exchanges, okay? And then you're credited this digital currency that is related to gold. And then you can spend this digital currency to buy your oil, to buy your wheat, to buy whatever. And I believe that is going to be the universal currency of a lot of these exchanges. So the asset-backed digital currencies, okay? Big picture here is most people think of digital currencies, they think of Bitcoin, they think of Ethereum, all that other kind of fun stuff. Well, for me, I believe the big problem with that is it's a ledger with no assets. Now, a lot of people will say, well, gold, what do? You take and you stick in the ground and you can't spend it. You can't take an ounce of gold and buy a loaf of bread with it. So both of them have weaknesses. But what if they were merged together? Now, people will talk about, well, why don't you just put this stuff on a database? Well, that's all proprietary. It's hidden. When things are in the blockchain, it can be easily audited by anyone. So I believe there's a transparency also that's going to be in this so-called new world of exchange, where all these countries can then also see who's buying what commodities with what they have. So if you're visualizing it, I'm using a product here, Kinesis. It's a graphic I've had for the last couple of years, so I'm going to use that here, but it can be load, it can be cash, it can be glint. Pax Gold. There's a lot of different ones out there. But the concept here is you're marrying the crypto ledger stuff with the physical properties of the gold and silver. So I call this the better mousetrap, where you're essentially using the blockchain for title. Okay, where traditional crypto, you're basically speculating on the value of this token. And we saw these things go up 1,000x, but there's no real utility in them. It's just wild speculation. The concept is, and this is where it stands everything on its head, with the asset-backed digital currencies, you're buying the underlying asset. The token is the title to the asset. So there is no way of this thing going 1,000x unless the underlying asset goes 1,000x. So it is a so-called stable coin, if you will. So in the big picture with this is that, let's just say for argument's sake, you own an ounce of gold on the blockchain. Well, you can spend this in fractions and fractions and fractions of a gram. So you can go buy a loaf of bread with your gold in a vault somewhere.
Yeah.
So visually, I called a lot of these non-asset backed cryptos, I call them empty parking spaces. And for anybody that's worked in IT, you think of memory, you think of a hard drive, you think of blocks where there's nothing at. And what you're doing with something like, one of these products, or you're putting an asset, a title of an asset on this blockchain. Now, obviously you need to have these things audited. And certain products, you can redeem the metals, certain products you can't, and others are kind of unknown. But all these different products that are out there have different drawbacks, they have different risks, they have different benefits. And with that, it's kind of, there's a lot of different problems it solves. I'm not going to go into all these here. People can pause it and read it, but there's a lot of cool things you can do with this. The big picture is you can spend your gold and spend your silver in fractions upon fractions upon fractions of a gram. And you can do it at point of sale. So you can store all of your financial energy. Remember, I showed the graphic above where if you stored it in currency, it would depreciate over time. And that time is now going to be depreciating a lot further, a lot faster because of all the debt. Well, if you can store all this financial energy into like gold and silver, and then only at the point of sale convert it to fiat just for that moment in order to buy a product in pretty much any currency you need, that's pretty much the better mousetrap to me. I don't need to hold my money in a bank. And think about what's happened recently. Let's just say for argument's sake, you got 500,000 in a bank. Okay. Now that's above the $250,000 threshold for the FDIC. And what happens one day if your bank goes belly up? You lose $250,000. So you're thinking right now, I got to take this money out. Well, what do I do with it? Well, what? Now I got to put it in one of the bigger banks, or I put it in another bank. Now all of a sudden I got all these different bank accounts, and you're still running in the same problem of banking risk. So I can tell you, I think a lot of people want to get out of these systems where you now have banking risks with bail-ins, possibly. Now, FDIC, there's was it 117 billion or so in the FDIC fund to somehow, it's 170 billion, I think, to somehow backstop 17 trillion in deposits. Now, how's that going to work out? So
a lot of losses.
Yeah. So I believe that there's a lot of problems with the banks coming up. But I believe also with these gold-backed digital currencies, if you will, I think there's going to be a commercial versus a private side of things. I think you're going to have a situation where, you're going to have these BRICS plus exchanges down the road where people are exchanging things for gold. And then you'll have on the COMEX, people are exchanging things for US dollars. And some of these suppliers are going to be like, look, I don't want that worthless US dollar. I want to go sell my stuff where I can get gold for it. And then when I hold that gold, I can convert it into any currency I want immediately. So I believe that is where it's going on the exchanges. And I believe a lot of people like myself are going to like, hey, I want to get in on this now because maybe someday, a couple years down the road, I'm buying something on Amazon and the shipper is coming from China. And they don't want my US dollars, but they'll take gold. So I believe there's going to be a level here where you're going to have your Visa, MasterCard, whatever, and then you're going to have your gold-backed digital product, whatever it is, that can be used for international currency. Think about that for a second. If you're a shop in China, you don't want US dollars anymore. Maybe your government doesn't even want you to take US dollars in anymore. So there's a situation there where you can be you can probably think of it in a situation where I believe a lot of people are going to start taking gold, and this isn't going to be in the next 2 or 3 years, but moving down the road, I think gold is going to be how a lot of these people are going to want to get paid. So big picture here, let's see, skating to where the puck is going, and I'm going to kind of wrap up the slideshow with that. I just threw a million things at you. I know I gave you this beforehand. Do you have any
Yeah.
questions on that?
No, and so after having saw the presentation, I see how it plays into your strategy of the different layers. And so, like, not want to put all your eggs in one basket, but taking advantage of opportunity as it presents itself. And definitely the tokenization of gold in the categories in which you listed it, it makes sense completely because it's in alignment with the transition we're making into a digital world, but then also being able to link something real into that world should give people comfort. So depending on your strategy, whatever, that's where it's up to each individual. But having some different layers to where you have some in your possession, you have some here, have some, so that definitely plays in. So let's dive in a little bit more. So you mentioned about giving us some of the layers. So just for that being one layer, I'm sure, share with us some other opportunities as far as layers that a person can consider as a part of their strategy.
So the first one, the core one, is physical that I talk about. And I mean, everyone knows this by now, but there's always, every single day, a lot of new people that are coming on listening to content like this. So you tell people to start with physical, but that's easier said than done sometimes, because if you're looking at $15 premiums on silver, it makes sense to, hey, maybe I shouldn't buy some physical right now. But everyone is told, hey, let's get some physical in our possession. But depending on your living situation, you're very much limited by how much you can have with that.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be buying these 1,000-ounce bars to sit around your house at all, because think about if there's an emergency and you got to get out real quick, fire, riots, whatever it is, you got to get out. You're not lugging these 1,000-pound bricks around with you.
Right.
So the first one is the physical, and then you have traditional vaulting services, things like that, and you can call out those guys, and their reputations are based on this. But the problem that I have with a lot of those things is you got to buy into their system. The vault may be halfway across the country. You may never ever get to see your metals, and then if an emergency happens, what guarantee do you have you're ever going to get that back?
Right.
So it doesn't mean that it's a zero risk of default. It may never happen. Okay.
Right.
But there's levels of risk with all of these things. Then you're talking about what else do I got? The mining stocks. There's like so many different types of miners you can have. For the newbies out there, you can do something like a GDX for the major miners and just sit back and just let it cook for a while. But miners run into issues because if there's high levels of inflation, their margins go terrible. So this past year in 2022, gold was flat for the year, but my portfolio was down 20% because I was dealing with a lot of miners that got killed for profits. But we're in a situation now where the prices are going to start going vertical with metals, and with that, you're going to start having much healthier margins. So I have a lot of miners. So that's my fun thing. I just recently started with futures, with COMEX futures. I do the micros. I play with them occasionally. Just recently, like if you bought a whole bunch of miners and you think, oh my God, right now metals have gone up, they're going to pull back a little bit. I don't want to sell all of my miners just because I know things are going to pull back 10%. I might just then short micro futures, and then I make money on the way down of this. And then when I feel it's done, I close that out and I buy more miners. So there's ways to do that. Also, like I said, there are the solutions like the gold silver backed tokens. So for me right now, that's kind of where I'm gravitating towards, because a lot of these types of things you don't have any vault costs. So unlike a traditional vaulting where you may have a nominal fee for vaulting, with these types of situations, you don't have any cost to vault. So I can start adding and stacking ounces there.
Now, out of curiosity, like with the cost, so like someone storing something for you, they have costs to do that. So how, I mean, just out of curiosity, I'm not familiar with how do they avoid or
Oh
what
yeah.
else service do they add
So
on top of that to make revenue?
okay, so there's a couple different ways that this happens. One of them is monetary metals does this. This isn't a crypto backed solution, but monetary metals, you buy gold, but then they turn around and lease out your gold.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's the revenue that comes in that pays for all that stuff. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, forgive me on the fringes of their business model here, but that's how they lease out the gold. But you have other products like a kinesis where when you buy into the system, there's a salami slice of a friction you buy in on. And then if you're going to spend some of it, there's a salami slice of a transaction. So all these transaction fees are millions of dollars, and it pays for the vaulting 100 times over. So the
Right.
vaulting costs overall in the system are very nominal compared to the size of the system. So with a system like that, you don't have a vaulting cost. You actually get a small yield. It's tiny.
Mm-hmm.
But the concept with it here is that I want to be able to store metals there more and more, because I can then, with a lot of these products, I can use a form of debit card to then spend my gold and silver real time at the point of sale at the grocery store. So I can buy my loaf of bread with the gold and silver I have in a vault. And again, it
Right.
may exchange it at that point of sale to US dollars immediately, or one of a bunch of other currencies they have. But again, if I'm in a country and I have this money in this vault, they have like 13, 14 vaults around the world. And if I want to, if I'm in Argentina and I want to flee their high inflation and somebody's coming after me, I can leave instantly. My metals are still in the vaults, and whatever destination country I go into, I can spend my money right there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some layers to this, and with those, the asset-backed digital currencies, I don't want to say that there's no risk involved with it. Now, the risk has been decreasing over the course of years, but you have risks where there's a bunch of these different companies out there. So you don't know certain companies with regards to audits. I know some of them are much better than others. Some of them tell you we don't audit at all. Some of them say you can redeem your metals. Others say you can't redeem your metals.
Mm-hmm.
What is that about? So there are different risks with these different products, but I think in the next few years, it's going to be like a Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and Discover for all of these different products. There's just going to be product differentiation amongst them. So
Right.
it's going to, but not only that, you're also talking, remember I talked about like some of the issues with the cryptos before, with possible issues with regulations. When a lot of these things were invented, there were no regulations for this. So a lot of
Right.
these companies acted in good faith, the best they could, because there were no laws in the books. Now they're coming through and they're smacking people down with these things, and they're lumping a lot of these types of weird, bad cryptocurrencies along with the ones that have like real title to things. So I
Right.
think over the course of time, a lot of those, um, a lot of the cryptos without any kind of asset backing are going to die out. They're going to
Right.
get killed. And those that actually have real utility of backing it to some sort of real asset that's audited, that go through their new regulatory requirements, I think they're going to come out of this really good and really strong. It's very early to tell because we don't know how each nation is going to act to these things. But you can tell if a country is very belligerent to it. Well, they're operating in another 60, 70, 80 countries. They don't need to operate in your country.
Right.
So I believe 5, 10 years down the road, this is going to be, everyone's going to be using these in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
How we get there could be really bumpy. So
Right.
hope it's
Right.
not, but that's why I limit the amount that I put in this, and in the Fuller video I did, I talked about limiting your risk in each one
Right.
of these. So
Right.
don't go out tomorrow and go into a cash or a load with all of your money, and then 2 weeks later they some sort of regulatory body comes out and whacks them down. So
Right.
yeah, be careful with that, everyone.
Right. Well, Nate, you laid out a great case for this particular layer out of your overall strategy that a person can assess and utilize for their own well-being. And so, of course, everyone's situation is different. But then again, having a little bit of exposure to some of these different things can better diversify you in a world of uncertainty. But yet, if it's all pointing towards the same direction, as far as metals, gold and silver in particular, as the currencies die out, the metals and as the economic energy will be absorbed into the metals as they continue to increase, nominally speaking. And so you'll be on the winning side in that regard there. But yeah, one of my biggest concerns is always risk, trying to eliminate as many third parties in between me and my economic energy that I work hard for, whatever in whatever form. And so that's why I just tell people definitely do your education, make sure you're aware and prepare for whatever could occur because you never know. But were you gonna say something?
Yeah, just with that, you know, everyone has uh a unique setup for what they have. Okay. Now I mentioned earlier on, I do real estate investing. I'm a mom and pop shop owner, if you will, of a handful of units. So I did lose money in the gold and silver over the last 2 years. Okay. I did,
Mm-hmm.
but I got that as a hedge against my real estate in case it went down. And what people don't realize is that I gained 6 times more on my real estate than I lost on my metals going down. So the hedge worked for me because it was, protection against doomsday. We're now at that state where it's quite possible we're now finally there. They kicked the can as much as they could. And now the real estate could start coming down. Commercial real estate starts to come down. And this is where I think my hedge is going to start picking up. So remember, everyone has a different situation. So if you have a massive stock portfolio, remember I mentioned there's 3 asset classes above. So, if you think the stock market is going to tank, it doesn't necessarily mean you got to sell out of all of it, but maybe divest some of it into different asset classes and try and protect yourself the best way you can. So yeah, I don't ever want to lay out to someone, you need 5% this, 8% that, because then you start getting into those tricky scenarios of financial advisors and licenses and all that stuff. So
Right.
I don't want to, no, I don't want any
Right.
part of that.
Yeah, same here.
So
I'll stay away from that. I
yeah,
just tell
talk to your
people I'm
financial
just here.
advisor.
I'm just here to give you what I consider to be monetary literacy. Once you understand what money is, it's not too hard to put together the pieces as to where you would like to be and what asset class you would like to be in more of, rather than what you would probably want to avoid given the circumstances we're in. So but Nate, we're approaching an hour, man. So this is, by far been a very detailed and juicy back and forth discussion. Unlike my traditional interviews, but then again, it was well worth it because you laid out such great details with your presentation there. So I thank you for joining us on RT interviews and pointing people back to your direction where they can find out more and stay in tune with what you got going on.
Well, I don't sell anything. I have a real, 9 to 5 job, if you will. So I do a lot of writing at renaissancemen.org. I do it for fun. I don't have any kind of fee for anything. So take it as you will. If I bang out one of these things real quick in 2 hours and I have some typos because my 2-year-old's crying for me, so be it. I'm not a professional in this sense, but I write it to try and I went through, I don't know, 6 years of grad school. So I want to try and educate the users as I'm reading things and learning things and getting excited about it. I want to share some of this that I'm learning with you. Paraphrase, so even
Right.
I write ridiculously long blogs, but
Mhm.
that might be, 20 hours of research I did to put into something that's, a couple pages long. So I hope some people find, entertainment with it and learn a little bit along the way.
That was good. Well, once again, Nate, thank you for joining us. Definitely looking forward to having you on. Hopefully, sometime before the end of this year, as all this stuff
Absolutely.
unwinds and we got more clarity as what's really going on, and get your thoughts. And of course, I check out your reading often, so I appreciate you for doing what you're doing, what you do. And once again, thank you for joining me on RTD interviews, and definitely look forward to connecting with you sometime in the near future.
Thank you.